So my life started when I was first born. My biological father was an alcoholic. My mother, she made the best of the situation she was handed. We grew up in trailer parks between different trailers. We would swap from one side of the trailer park to the other. If we weren't in a trailer park, we were living with my grandmother. If outside my grandmother back in other trailer parks. From the time I was born, for as long as I can remember, my father was an alcoholic. As I grew up and lived with my grandmother, she tried to get us into church. We would go to Nesbitt Baptist and we would go there. And we kind of on and off and back and forth. And when we'd get back to the trailer, my dad would always move back in with us. He wasn't allowed to live at my grandmother's. When we moved back in the trailer, he'd move back in with us, and it was kind of the same cycle over and over again. I guess I was probably 8, 9 when I first got my real experience with Christ. I had an uncle who was big into the RAs with his church, and he would come and he would basically rescue me for those weekends. They lived in Memphis, so I couldn't go to the Wednesdays, Sundays, but if there was a camping trip, I got to go. Tri-state camporees, hiking, backpacking, all those fun things. And I remember one trip, I was probably 10 or 11, we were at Little Red River, and we got to talking about what it meant to be a Christian and accepting Christ, and we got told to go back to your tents, and we got to have prayer time and to kind of reflect to see what it was. Well, everybody else around me, I knew I understood what he was saying, and so I prayed, and I prayed the prayer, and I asked Christ to come into my life. And at that moment, I didn't really know what I was doing, just knew that I was doing it. So as I got older, I met the guy I call my brother. We used to ride the school bus together, and I don't know what about it made us hit it off, but we did. And as we rode the school bus, I got to be where, we were in class together. We'd ride to school back and forth. Then on weekends, I'd start spending the night at his house. As the school year went on, that pretty much became every weekend. And then as the summer hit, I would end up spending the weeks there and the weekends at my house. I think it was more of an escape mechanism as anything else, but his mom and dad they insisted that I call them mom and dad, or they didn't like using their first names. So to this date, they are mom and dad to me. And dad took me in and he taught me how to hunt. He taught me how to fish, work on cars, everything that I think I was lacking at home. And it got so bad, I remember one time being in a restaurant, and we walked in, and I didn't realize it at the time, but I walked in with my brother, and my real parents were in there at the same time. My foster parents were in there. And I call them my foster parents. There was no paperwork, but they're the ones who raised me into who I am today. So they get as much credit as anybody else. When I walked in, my real dad was there, and he was a little intoxicated. And I walked in, said hi to them, but went and sat with mom and dad, ordered dinner, and me and my brother walked out. And as I was walking out, my real dad hollers, "Hey, thanks for raising my son." And, of course, my foster dad was like, "You're welcome." But at that moment, I realized that it really helped me realize who my father was at that point in time, and who was helping to kind of set my goals and direction in life. Go through high school and junior high, and we get there, and I still remember the RA trips, but I'd kind of gotten older and gotten out of the church, and even those little bit of trips I wasn't getting anymore, and did the normal things that teenagers do, and got into high school. And about my senior year in high school, my wife and I started dating. She was raised up in a Christian household, and she was in church. She did all of the Sunday nights, Wednesday nights, she was there with her church groups, and when I wasn't working, I was with her. And if it meant spending time there, that's what we would do. And I really started enjoying it. It was hard on days that I had off because I'd worked and gone to school and everything, but it was fun. We finished college together. She's a year older than I am. So we got married my senior year in college. She was done and had already started teaching, and I was still trying to figure out where I was going to work, but we pushed through that first year of me working 40 plus hours a week, going to school full time, her working, and I think we saw each other maybe once a week when I had a day off and it was at night. Other than that, we passed each other in the hallway. It was a rough go, but we made it, and she ensured that we were in church every Sunday, and there would be some fights at the house, but she usually won. It wasn't long into that a little after we'd gotten married, that we got invited to come do a passion play out at a little church, little country church in Hernando, and they needed a thief for the cross. Well, I kind of went out there not knowing what I was getting myself into. But next thing I know, I'm wearing a diaper standing in front of a congregation, been tanned brown, and I'm sitting up there next to Jesus on this cross. Well, it was at that moment I felt comfortable enough that I decided, we might need to start going to church here. Well, we went to church there, and that was our home, our church home for a while. My wife got pregnant with our first son, and he was born in 2007. And I remember when she got pregnant with him, it was all we wanted. Our life was good, but we knew we wanted a child. And so she gets pregnant, and as she goes in to be induced, and there's some complications in that process when she would kind of lay. If she wasn't laid a certain way, they'd lose his pulse and everything else, and it was just difficult, and the doctors kept coming in and check and everything else. And I remember at one point in time going and I went outside and I came back in, and on the way back into the room I found the chapel. And as I walked by, I went into the chapel and I hit my knees and just prayed for everything to be all right. And once I finished my prayer, I went in. Our son was born. They had to kind of rush him back. He had some fluid on his lungs, but other than that, he was perfectly healthy. They kept him for a few hours and then brought him out to us, and everything was great. So we get our son home, everything's going good, and we're living life, and we're going to church. I remember the first time he was old enough for us to actually take out to our little church, and he started crying. And me and my wife, as new parents, we're trying to hush him. We're trying to get him up, feed him, whatever it takes to get him. And our pastor looks at us and he says, "Don't you dare make that baby be quiet." He said, "We haven't heard a kid cry in this sanctuary in I don't know how many years, and that's a blessed sound." And that was when we felt comfortable and we knew we were at home. My son's first birthday, we did our baby dedication for him. And well, actually it wasn't his first birthday, but it was the first Father's Day we did his baby dedication. And at that time, they were going to sprinkle him with water, and the pastor said, "Have you ever been baptized?" And I said, "Well, no, sir." Well, he said, "We're fixing to fix that." And we talked and had meetings, and we went through the process. And on the same day my son had his infant baptism, I had my baptism as a grown man. And life was good. A few years go by, and my wife wants another child. And at that point, I was kind of happy with where we were and didn't want one. And one thing leads to another, and she ends up not feeling well one day and is having some issues, and her mom takes her to the doctor, and she had ended up having a miscarriage. And it was at that moment that I felt that I was being told, "We don't need any more children. This is a sign that we didn't." But she kept pushing, and it started causing some strains in our relationship. And as things progressed and things changed, I looked for comfort somewhere else, and I ended up, it ended up leading to an affair. And for several years, I carried on long-term affair with one individual. And during the course of that, my wife gets pregnant with our second child. When we have our second child, I tried to end the affair, but my brain and body and myself was still just not in the right spot, and I thought I was in love somewhere else, and it caused a rift and a separation for about 3 months, and it really took some perspective and some time and a lot of lecturing from some really good friends and even my grandmother to kind of make me see that it wasn't about the decisions I was making and what I wanted in life, but the things that I'd been given, through God, through Christ, and things like that. And it was at that moment a friend of mine told me to read Daniel. And I probably read the book of Daniel, I don't know how many times. And I was doing that on my own, and at the same time my wife and I were going through counseling, and we saw 2 different pastors who were counseling us. We went to an actual marriage counselor, and one of our pastors, Ephesians 5. And again, Ephesians 5 is about like the book of Daniel. I've read it. They call it the love chapter, and I've read it more times than I can count. And it really stuck with me at first how a wife was supposed to treat her husband. And it wasn't until the pastor looked at me and said, well, do you know how you get your wife to treat you that way? Is to treat her the way this book tells you to treat your wife. And at that point, things started changing. And I actually started working to fix my marriage and to progress in our marriage. A few months go by, and I end up moving back in with my wife, and things are rough at first. There's trust and denial and anger and more emotions than you could count on one finger. On one hand, your feet and everything else. And we worked through it. We got over it. And at the same time, we're still praying. We're going to church, and our church family is just, they're loving on us. And they're praying because of the things that are happening in our life. It wasn't long after that some mission opportunities came along, and I really saw that as an opportunity for me to put myself out, share my story, and to get out. And I started going on, taking advantage. I've been to Seattle on mission trips, canvassing for new church plants. Several years ago, I went to Bangkok, Thailand for 10 days, and as a boy from the country who'd going to a city like Bangkok, that was just unbelievable. But in the course of that trip, I got to see God work in people's lives who had never seen or heard Christ, whose families kept them away from Christ because it wasn't what the family was supposed to do. And it was, I really think that was a defining moment in my life of, now you're living for God, and God's telling me now I'm doing what He's asked of me, not what I've asked of myself. And because of that, things have changed. My wife and I are happy. We just celebrated our 14th anniversary. We have 2 healthy kids. And because of all that, we look back at what we've been through. And my youngest son, we refer to as our miracle child. And the main reason for that is, 1, because of what it took for him to come into this world. But 2, we really think that if God had not given us that miracle, that we wouldn't be where we're at today as husband and wife. And so because of that, I'm thankful for the things that I've been given without asking for, and then the things that I'm given through asking. And I've learned that it's important to live life not for myself, but for God and for Jesus, and to do the things that He wants us to do, because in the end, that's why we're here. We're His, and we should act for Him. I'm Jim Bob Liston, and His grace is enough.